Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, I'm so delighted to welcome three amazing leaders of the museum field: Tom Denenberg, John Wilmerding, director of the Shelburne Museum, Julián Zugazagoitia, director and CEO of the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, and John Stomberg, director of the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. Welcome all. I'm so excited to have you. John, Julián, we both have done interviews in the past. Tom, I am so delighted to have you here. We've been trying to get you on for a while. So let's start with you. You are a curator, museum director, huge museum experience in New England. I'd like to talk about this idea of museum and community, museum sitting at the center of building community and dialogue around art, around culture, around who we are. Could you talk about your role as an ambassador of New England, of a New England museum, but also this idea of creating this community experience around art, where everybody can come together, strangers come together and enjoy and talk and think together as a community and also as a country. We're going to go around the country, as a matter of fact, and continue the dialogue. But Tom, let's start with you.
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you, Mark. And when I came to the museum 15 years ago, depending how the algorithm was working on a given day, if you Googled Vermont, you actually got the round barn at Shelburne Museum. So the first building you see as you come onto our campus was in fact kind of an avatar for the whole state of Vermont, and to a certain extent, northern New England. Our museum was founded in 1947 by a woman named Electra Havemeyer Webb to be what she called an educational project varied and alive. There have been any number of mission statements for the museum over the last 75 years, but I go back to that letter that she wrote, educational project varied and alive. And then there's some more language about for Vermonters and those who visit us. And I think that sort of oscillation between an audience that comes here in the warm weather, the summer and the fall. Vermont is, viewed as a kind of principal tourist destination on the East Coast of the United States. And then for those of us who get to live here year round. So we are both for and of Vermont. We bring creativity to the community, to the table, and we also hold up everything that goes on in Vermont, the collections, the artistic endeavors, the creative culture of our brave little state.
When people come into the museum, what are they coming to experience?
So we're a little unusual. The Shelburne Museum comprises 39 buildings, and actually we're building a 40th as we speak. So 40 buildings on 153 acres. So Electra Webb was participating in that kind of broad mid-century movement of founding these open-air museums, like Colonial Williamsburg from 20, 30 years earlier, Old Sturbridge Village. But unlike the more archaeologically correct sort of history museums, she was never terribly interested in, specific narratives. She wanted to connect people with experiences. She was one of the women, along with Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, who defined folk art in the 1920s and 30s. So each building that she moved here was then, densely installed in a almost sort of modernist sensibility of, seriality and if one quilt is a good thing to have, then 30 is the better answer. If one trade sign is a good thing to have, well, then stuff the building with trade signs. So this idea of experiences is something that we talk about a lot at the museum as we engage with audiences. Some years back when we worked on our last strategic plan, I actually asked my colleagues to stop categorizing things as buildings, collections, and gardens, but just talk about it all as experiences. What are the sort of seamless moments where when you walk in the front door, what are the paths that you follow as you engage with the institution?
And as we move down now to Kansas City, Julián, the Nelson-Atkins is a much more traditional encyclopedic museum. It has a great place in my heart. That the architecture of that institution and the combining of the modern and the Federalist sort of very classical American architecture is some of the most elegant that I've ever seen. Talk a little bit about your institution, because you're not spread over acres and acres, right? You don't have a bunch of different buildings, disparate buildings for people to wander about. When you go through this museum, your museum, you're actually having an encyclopedic experience, aren't you?
That's the attempt, and I think that is also what the founding families had in mind. We opened the Beaux-Arts building in the 1930s, and it really springs from the movement of realizing that a great city can only thrive if it has and offers to its community access to the creations of the world. And in that sense, the two founding families who had access to traveling in Europe, and at the time that was like the access that they had, they wanted to bring art to Kansas City. And a series of happenstance, it was not built by the collection of an existing collection of a family, but it was rather thought out professionally. And so the land in which we sit was definitely the outskirts of the city at the time, the first suburbs. So we're very close to something called the Plaza. The Plaza was the first outdoor shopping mall created in America in the 20s. And so all of this region where the museum sits, which is now completely central to the epicenter of where the city has grown, it was very nice land, and there was a lot of space, and it was the house of the founding Mr. Rockwell William Nelson. And with the idea, this is a place where people should gather and contemplate art. What I was saying, it was from the beginning managed by professional art historians that tried to do an encyclopedic. And by encyclopedic, and the word actually not everyone understands what we mean by that, is like our insider lingo. But the idea is to have representation of the whole world. What are the arts of the whole world? And very early on, we were collecting photography, Native American art, folk art, American art. But what the Nelson is most known for is their Asian collections. And it was also by fluke that we had one of those early directors was posted in one of his students was posted in China, and therefore we had access during the Chinese Cultural Revolution to works of art that were available at the time. So the organic way of growth of this collection has been amazing, always led by people and very talented that were looking for great works of art, examples of the best cultures in the world. And what I would say is to this day, the responsibility of buying any work of art comes in a heavy way for all of us, because our predecessors have bought so well, and we don't have many numbers of works of art. I mean, as the prestige of this institution is, the numbers is less than 50,000, which for the size of our footprint is small, and yet it is the quality of each of those works of art that is wonderful and illustrative of many civilizations. So that is a little bit the reason that the tension to buy art is always great. And again, great responsibility. And I would end up by saying we do have a world purview through the museum. And right now we're even beginning a new expansion to be able to deploy collections that we have had since the 30s, like a Mesoamerican collection or an Islamic collection that are not right now on the walls, and we want to bring them out.
Well, and the intentionality that binds these two museums together, right, of creating this resource for the community. Julián, when you talk about the intentionality of assembling a collection in order to bring the world to Kansas City and Kansas City to the world, it's just astounding. Now, John, you're the new kid on the block, and you're also the old man of the group, right? Because you have a collection that goes back 250 years that spans the history of this nation, and you have a museum that was built in the 80s, right? So talk a little bit about the intentionality behind Dartmouth is so manifest. It's so bound up with the history of the nation. Talk a little bit about that intentionality that ended up being encapsulated in the Hood Museum.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, the college was founded in 1769, and the first documented object came into the college 2 years later, and it's a tooth of a mastodon, and we still have the mastodon tooth. It's on display today. It's a favorite alumni event parlor game to ask what the first thing we collected was. But then fast forward into the mid 20th century, it started to become clear that it would be lovely to have a special place to put all these collections. And so, yeah, the museum has the benefit of only being founded in 1985. The benefit there is that there are a lot of decisions that could be made in advance to make this a specific kind of museum. And it was intended as a teaching museum. By early 1990s, we had the first academic coordinator. And so everything we do is actually geared towards Dartmouth and its curriculum and its professors. And professors are on our committees. And it's a lovely fact of life that we have this guiding principle that shapes every decision, from the acquisitions we make and the exhibitions we make to how the building is shaped. Some of our prime real estate in this new building, the Todd Williams Billy Chen edition in 2019, is given over to classrooms. First floor, right on the left, all classrooms, where we teach with objects. So the collection was a bit meandering because nobody was collecting for a museum. The anthropology department had its collections. The classics department had its collections. Art history and studio, they all had their own collections, which all came under one roof when we built the Hood in 85. Since then, we've been much more deliberate in building a collection that reflects the student body at Dartmouth, deliberately international, and we try and reflect as broadly as possible the global world and our exhibitions. Right now, if you look at our website, you'll see that that's not the case. We're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States with a series of a dozen exhibitions which focus on different parts of the history. But being a teaching museum has given us both a privilege and a responsibility to make sure that we are examining issues as well as art at any given moment. And I think that's readily obvious when you walk into our galleries. A lot of people walk in and say, wait, what's going on here? I don't know. This doesn't look the same as other places. But that's fine because they're all thesis-driven exhibitions, and we have odd pairings at any given moment, which we're very proud of.
One of the things that I experience in working with you all and working with other museum directors is that museums really do change their character from place to place and from institution to institution. And sometimes there is this external view that all museum directors function in the same way at all museums. And that's just not, you're laughing, Tom. So let's talk a little bit about that, because if we rotated here, right, and John was in Vermont, and Tom, you were in Kansas City, and Julián, you were in at Dartmouth, you would actually all function differently. You'd have different canvases to paint on, if you want to put it that way. Let's talk a little bit about that. How do you see the distinctive attributes of a place like Kansas City or a place like in Shelburne or in Hanover? How do you see these affecting the work of a museum director in terms of managing their institution, but also connecting to their community and their various missions?
I can take a crack at that, which is I think often we end up, somewhat credentialing ourselves, toward the institution or the region. And, that's, as that's where we always talk about the fit. Are you a good match for the organization? A lot of what was my scholarly work, has to do with why New England looks like New England in images, objects, and texts, paintings, photography, architecture. So, the wonderful thing about Shelburne is there's just this kind of broad palette with which to work. I also like the capital project side of things. A little subset of my career has been managing expansion projects or preservation, renovation projects. So I'm just as likely to be wearing a tie and jacket as I am to have a high-vis vest on, climbing on a scaffold any day this week. So that's just something I've always enjoyed. I personally grew up, in New York. My mother worked in museums. My father designed museums. So I'm familiar with more traditional museum environments. But Shelburne is a particularly New England-y environment.
Well, it's interesting that you reference that sort of cross-fertilization, right, from the major urban environment to a different type of environment. And Julián, you have a similar story, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you didn't grow up in Kansas City. You didn't grow up in that area of the world. And here you've been serving, what, for 15 years? Or
15 years. Like I do think that while we all have the same title exactly, each institution intersects with the function. And whether you're a university museum, the functioning is very different. Whether you're a civic or city museum, for instance, in the case of the Nelson-Atkins, we do not receive public funding. A museum like LACMA is also a city museum, but receives funding from the county in that case. So each museum's the founding histories, the funding, whether it's public, private, a mix of that, all of that defines who our principal interactors are. Besides exactly taking care of curators, education, interpretive programs, all of that that's internal, it's how we phase out the changes. But in my particular role, so I was before, as you know, in New York City, both at Museo del Barrio and the Guggenheim, so very urban museums focused in a way on Fifth Avenue, the Guggenheim receiving almost half of its visitation from tourists that come for the first time to New York, want to see the building. I remember that we were closed during a few weeks after September 11, tragically, but people would come just to see the building. And so in those cases, when I moved to Kansas City, what my experiment is seeing how to work really in a community that has no tourism to speak of. I mean, it's not driven by tourism or attendance. And then how to multiply and repeat visitation. So how do you really go deep into working with the school district, with families, and bringing people that have never had the opportunity to come through various mechanisms. I remember
that conversation with you that we had in your office, right?
Exactly.
How do you actually create an experience that people have to have over and over and over and over again and keep it fresh?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
You seem to have cracked the code.
No, I look, I thank you for saying that. We're working every day as hard as possible on cracking that code. But I think both with John and Tom, we would all think that the biggest obstacle we have is, so for instance, here we are free to the public. We bring a lot of school children, and last night we had the parents of those school children being brought to the museum in buses that we sent to the different school districts in the evening, so that their kids would become the docents or the tour guides. And you should see the pride in parents that have never come before to see that their kids are fluent with how easy it is to navigate a museum. But I think what we have in common, and this is true to anyone, is the people who say museums are not for me. And when people say that to me, what I translate to is, I had a bad experience many years ago, or I went and they said, don't touch, don't do this. And today, I think all of us have worked to try to transform that into experiences that are positive. And I think we're gaining traction because I see younger generations and more diverse audiences coming to our places. But it is always that barrier that we have to fight, is the person who self-describes or has ideas that you have to have a PhD in art history to feel comfortable in the museum. And those are obstacles that we fight every day. So as much as I feel gratified that I have doubled the attendance in the last 10 years, and it's never finished, because I go to the stadium, at the Kauffman Stadium, I see 80,000 people rooting for the Chiefs, and I know many of those people have not come to the museum. It's like, how can I get them there too? It's also for them, the museum.
And Hood has a very long tradition of working with public schools, talking about that. you really are a doorway into Dartmouth, aren't you? For the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So I often say that we're the most porous part of Dartmouth College because it's the place where, as effortlessly as possible, the community can meet with the college campus. And, our exhibitions, they tend to be a little over thought out, a little over researched for a lot of people. But, at this point, our communities tend to expect that from us. They're coming in to say, oh, what have they got going on this time? Our audience is primarily the community, even though our target audience is, of course, the student and faculty of Dartmouth College. But in terms of the numbers, 60%, 70% are community members, and then a little number from tourism. I'm jealous of Tom's tourism numbers because basically people drive up the highway by Hanover on their way up to Vermont to go skiing. And so we don't have that kind of tourist audience. But, you're talking a little bit about the impact of directors and what changes they can make. And I think it is true that, a director can guide a museum in a way that has a lot to do with values. I come from an art background. I've been very much artist centric and have tried to make galleries that are interesting for artists as well as for our community members. And, we had a conference here a while back where we invited artists who were new to the collection to talk about what it was like to have their art in the company of art that was already here. And, what's that whole experience like? So we all bring different sensitivities to it. And hopefully each museum ends up with a slightly different personality, not just because of the director, but because of the energy that they surround. Like we've got 7 curators now, and they're all bringing different kinds of energy to the look of the museum, because museums could fall into the trap of becoming like that one highway that every town has, where there's a Rite Aid and a Wendy's and a Burger King and and you could be in Detroit or Denver and it doesn't really matter because they have that same look. And museums could fall prey to that kind of standardization, which could guarantee success, but also kind of enshrines boredom and mediocrity. So I think that having museums which stand out from one another is really very important.
I love that comment that you made about enshrining boredom and mediocrity. It reminds me of a conversation I had with one of the Hood trustees or advisors. I can't remember what your board
advisors
called advisors. And he was a Goldman Sachs partner. He said, half of the exhibitions I love at the Hood, and half of them I just hate, but I'm never bored. And I like the fact that I am challenged to see some merit in something that I look at and it just isn't for me. It doesn't move me in that way. Right. It moves me in a negative way. But he said, right, I am never bored. And that's what you're talking about, right? You right. don't want people to just come in and see the same old things and be bored. You want them to be incited. You want them to be excited.
Yeah. So that is absolutely the case.
So as we talk about the greater role of museums in society, how do you all see it? I mean, at this point, it just seems like there's a real disaffection with almost every institution that we have. There's a distrust of AI and tech, which didn't used to be there. There's a distrust of medicine. There's a distrust of our politics. There's people aren't talking to each other. Art seems to be kind of a neutral space, but it isn't neutral, right? Artists have a point of view. Artists are going to produce things that you hate or you love or whatever. But how do we use these museums to create the glue that society requires? Tom, you want to give
Yeah, and I think we all know there have been studies that say we are amongst the last trusted institutions in society right now, and because of the political discourse right now, demonizing higher education. So that does present a special responsibility. We talked a little bit about our role as educational institutions earlier, and I think I'm perhaps proudest of the fact that 10% of Vermont school-age children come to Shelburne Museum every year, and I think if we start with the youngest visitors and sort of work from there. I also love John's comment and yours, Mark, about, I actually take seriously negative comment cards. And if we are, provoking someone to think a little differently about a topic, I think that's wonderful when we can. There's a pretty broad spectrum of exhibitions that we organize at the museum. I think if there was a Shelburne Museum type or brand of exhibition, it is when we invite contemporary practitioners in to do these interventions into the historic collections, either in historic spaces or the Pizzigalley Center, which is our temporary exhibition building. And those are always, moments where, we are asking sort of fundamental questions where we hope we do become, as you said, sort of the glue or the connective tissue for the community. I think we always sort of start and end the conversations with how are we serving community here? Which communities, which audiences?
I just wanted to pipe in to say one of the things that unites the three of us too is a commitment to Native American art, which was for so long overshadowed and ignored. And, certainly the Nelson-Atkins has had a leadership position in this field for a long time. And we certainly look to them as we built. And I know Tom has probably looked to them too. So, we do take things from each other and we look over our shoulders constantly at what our neighbors are doing. And, Dartmouth was founded to educate Native Americans and did a terrible job of it until the 1970s. So it became clear when we rebuilt that we had to make sure we had lots of room for that. And I know Tom is about that as well. But, the Nelson-Atkins has a special place in presenting and preserving Native American art and culture.
The DNA, if you will, between the three organizations is actually very, very tight in this regard. Some of Ted Coe's collection was rehomed to Shelburne Museum a couple of months ago. And Ted, of course, was at the Nelson-Atkins. But the commitment of the three organizations to Indigenous representation, I think, is probably almost, unprecedented in this country. There are other museums that do a wonderful job, but I think these three organizations are particularly good examples.
I think it's partly the museums have the license. There's an acceptance because of the nature of artists and their work to question conventional wisdom, and it perhaps is a safer space, and nowhere is this more obvious in the treatment of art movements and artists that have been marginalized, whether it's African American art and artists, African art and artists, Native American art and artists. You start to see that even in a time when this idea of different perspectives is being vilified, even in that time, in our museums, we have a safe space to query that conventional wisdom, right, Julián?
And I would expand in even that more, that in that notion that, yes, today we're one of the trusted institutions. And the other thing that I think is valuable, and you can see it in this conversation, and also thanks to the great friends that you have invited, is there's a great collegiality. So the museum world is in deep way collegial to one another. So we compete against each other for the best ideas, but we don't compete against each other in a negative way. We are solidarity in trying to move the field forward, and whether it is sharing collections, sharing ideas, I think this is also something very particular to the museum world. And well, in each of the positions that we occupy, the word director means something different. I think at the core also, we are bound by the principles and the ethics that were something that brought us to the field, I think. And that, I think, is reflected even in this conversation, the camaraderie that exists among the three of us.
And if you were going to all leave us with one thought about why we should visit your museum,
I think it's because we still offer an authentic, unmediated experience. You can stand in front of an artwork and feel something. Maybe you don't even recognize what the feeling is, but it's authentic, it's real. And at a time with increasing mediation in the world, art is a place to really ground yourself in a special kind of experience.
First, because we're free. And so you can very easily access the museum's collections. You'll have access to the world, but in a time in which we're seeing so much images and coming from AI that you don't know how it was produced, who produced it. What you know and the guarantee is that you'll have authentic things that a man or a woman just like us did 5,000 years ago, or someone who's a contemporary artist interpreting the most difficult things of our time and giving a voice to feelings and interpretation that might be inside of us, but we have never been able to express that way. But authenticity is perhaps what will save our museums today.
Agree completely with John and Julián. And, on a good day, visit to Shelburne Museum provokes, awe, inspiration, that unmediated experience with, the rarest French Impressionist paintings to, the better mousetrap that you might find, at Shelburne Museum, because we're so heterogeneous. But I think in the end, it's about, offering people the opportunity to see their world a little differently. And the world is challenging and complex right now. And there are lessons to be learned at all three museums. And I'm just so pleased that I'm here with my friends to talk about it with you.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to talk so briefly. We can go on, of course, but it's been a great pleasure to talk so briefly with all of you. Julián Zugazagoitia of the Nelson-Atkins Museum, John Stomberg of the Hood Museum, and Tom Denenberg of the Shelburne Museum in Vermont. It's just great to catch up again with you. Have a great day, and thank you all so much for your insights from the Shelburne, from the Hood, and from the Nelson-Atkins.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.